Thank you all for having me. It's great to be here. And I've known Ross for a few years, and he's just done incredible things in the investment and business world. So it's really an honor to be here. And what I'd like to talk about today is, Ross asked me to give kind of some insights into the economy, the housing market. And what I'd like to talk about today is something that I talk a lot about on my podcast and YouTube channel, which is understanding the real value of things. And it could apply to anything, not just real estate. But the big question everybody is asking is, when will the bubble burst? When will the market stop? When will the collapse be? When will the crash be? When is the end of the world coming? All of these types of questions, right? And, I'd like to share some insights with you on that today. So this is just a very important thing in life in general. Also, of course, with investing, it's very important. And just this whole concept of using the right measuring stick to measure things. So when we're measuring the value of a property, right, what is the right way to measure that? Now, the default way, at least in the United States and in many parts of the world as well, the default way, which is not necessarily the smart way, is to measure it in dollars, right? To say, how many dollars does it cost to buy this property? And if you're selling this property, how many dollars can I get when I sell the property, right? Seems simple enough, doesn't it? But let me ask you this. What if you didn't measure that in the US dollar, and instead you measured it in these things that are also called dollars? These are Zimbabwe dollars. Okay. And these Zimbabwe dollars are worth quite a bit less than the US dollar. And so here, one of my podcast listeners sent these to me years ago. Here I have a $20 trillion Zimbabwe note. Okay. And here I got 50 trillion. So I'm clearly very rich. Here I've got 100 trillion Zimbabwe note, right? And they're not worth anything. Right? You can go and you can buy a latte at your favorite coffee shop with one of these, right? It's not worth much at all. So it really depends on the measuring stick. And of course, that's kind of an easy target to say the Zimbabwe dollar, isn't it? But it makes a lot more sense when you look at it in some different measuring sticks. So everybody right now out there pretty much thinks real estate is expensive. Okay. So how many of you think real estate is expensive? Okay. And, unmute yourself, turn on your video, raise your hand, put something in the chat. I don't know, do something. Okay. So I can get some knowledge. So how many of you think real estate's expensive? Yeah. Okay. So most people do, right? And if you measure it in dollars, that is true. But what if you measured real estate not in the dollars on the price tag of the real estate, but on the monthly payment on the real estate? It's still measured in dollars. We're not even talking about gold or Bitcoin or oil or pork bellies or soybeans or euros or yen or all these other things of value that you could measure it in, right? We're just simply talking about dollars. But we're talking about, instead of the overall price being $200,000 for the house that used to be $120,000, what about the monthly payment, which is how most people buy a house, right? So that's another measuring stick, even though it's still in dollars. So let's explore this, and let's make sure we are thinking about these things the right way and we're using the right measuring stick. Now, I used to say this all the time. Well, I still say it all the time on my podcast. And so my listeners dubbed it the Jason Hartman question. I certainly didn't invent this question, okay? But, it's one that I use a lot. And the question is, compared to what? Compared to what, right? Well, what are you comparing things to? That is the question of everything in life. I mean, look, when we go, when we're not even talking about money, when we go out into the world and say we're young and single and we're looking for either a mate or a significant other, what do? We compare, right? That's natural, right? Oh, she's hot or he's a good catch, right? We're only doing that by comparison, right? Everything in life is a comparison question. And that's an important thing when we want to determine the value of anything, is to compare it with something else. And so we've always got to ask ourselves that question, compared to what? So when you look at the price of housing, let's compare it to a few things. Let's compare it to gold or Bitcoin or other things as well, right? And then let's compare it on the overall price to the monthly payment. And then let's adjust that over time. And let's see if a house is more expensive or less expensive than it was back in, say, 2006, 15 years ago, right before the Great Recession. And the answer is going to surprise you, I promise. Okay, so let's dive in and check this out. All right, so is there a bubble, right? Is there a bubble? This is the question everybody is asking. Everybody's afraid that they're going to buy at the top and then they're going to be stuck, right? And so then the next question, obviously, if there is a bubble, when's it going to pop, right? When will the bubble pop? So one of the things I teach is something I call packaged commodities investing. And the packaged commodities investing concept is really investing less for the overall house, right? Or apartment building or apartment complex. I've owned some big apartment complexes and a bunch of single family homes, and I've got a mobile home park too. And we're building some single family homes on the park and in a certain area of it. So, I've dabbled in a few things over the years for sure. But a lot of parts of real estate I haven't done. But one thing I know for sure is that just like a cake, a house is made of ingredients, right? It's made of, what is it made of? Well, it's made of lumber. It's made of copper wire that's in the walls to carry the electricity. It's made of petroleum products. It's made of energy. It's made of labor, okay? And labor is certainly a commodity. It's made of glass and steel, concrete. All of these ingredients are part of the packaged commodities. Now, you could buy these commodities individually, not assembled or packaged. I also call this assembled commodities investing as well. In the form of a house, you could go and you could buy lumber on the commodities market. You could buy steel. You could buy copper. And you could buy these things as separate commodities on a commodities exchange. But because they're packaged or assembled in the form of a house, they are entitled to all sorts of new, very special privileges. Some of these privileges are that income property is the most tax-favored asset class in America. There is no other asset as favored from a tax perspective, at least not that I know of, as income property. Very tax favored, and taxes are the single largest expense any of us have in our lives. So that's one privilege, right? Another privilege, although a lot of people don't necessarily look at it as a privilege, is debt. I like to say that debt is my favorite four-letter word. and debt is a very powerful thing, because obviously with real estate we can use leverage, and we can use that very effectively to accelerate our wealth creation and lower our risk, right? And it's also very favored in the way that you can put together this debt and create income and create tax benefits and get depreciation and write off other things on your taxes as well, right? So that's all beautiful. But if you bought these things separately, you wouldn't get any of these benefits. You couldn't get a 30-year fixed rate, ultra cheap loan buying steel on a commodities exchange, and you wouldn't get any tax benefits for it either. But you get it when it's assembled in the form of a house. So one of these ingredients, of course, is lumber. And this probably isn't a surprise to any of you, because you're all sophisticated and you know what's going on in the world. Lumber prices are absolutely through the roof. It's shocking how expensive lumber has become, but also many other ingredients are the same way. So here, if you look at steel and lumber prices, right, fabricated structural metal products, look at the percent change. Here, 3.2%, iron and steel, 15.6%. It's just absolutely shocking what has happened to the prices of any of these things. And the overall price of houses has gone up too, right? Not just the price of the specific ingredients, but the overall price. In fact, lumber alone, they're saying now that just the cost of the lumber price increases is adding $24,000 in end price to the typical new home. So just skyrocketing prices of all of this stuff. Another strategy I teach is called inflation-induced debt destruction. And this strategy basically helps people understand a hidden wealth creator that comes with buy and hold real estate, okay? And that is inflation. Because not only do our tenants pay down our mortgage over time, right? They pay down the principal balance of the mortgage. That's sort of the obvious thing. But also inflation pays off our mortgage for us as well. And this is really this hidden wealth creator that very few people really understand, but it is an incredible and beautiful thing. And so we're going to touch on that as well. Here, if we look at home prices compared to the most common metric for inflation, which is the CPI or the Consumer Price Index, we can see that mostly home prices track the CPI pretty closely. But sometimes they get way out of sync with the Consumer Price Index, and home prices go way above the CPI. Now, this particular chart is based on the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, which I think is pretty flawed, and I don't have time to go into that today, but just know that this is the most commonly used index, but it is very flawed. And I'm releasing a video on my YouTube channel comparing the different home price indexes. So that'll be coming out in the near future here. But suffice it to say, it's a comparison, right? And if we use the same index over time, then it does tell us something, even if the index, in my opinion, is not the best index, okay? But here we see that home prices will go way above the rate of the official inflation rate that the government tells us, which is also very flawed, okay? It's very understated, and the government has a lot of motivation to understate the inflation rate. But you see, it gets out of sync, and then we had the Great Recession, and then prices came back, and now they're way up again, right? Far above the Consumer Price Index. But does that mean housing is overpriced? Well, I don't know. You can be the judge. So one thing we've got is we've got this rich uncle, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And Powell, unlike other Federal Reserve chairmen before him, like Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan, the longest one, he is very, very open about his plans. Most of them aren't. They talk in code, especially Alan Greenspan. He used to, there was this whole school of economists out there that would try and interpret what he's saying. What does he mean, right? Well, Jerome Powell is a money printer. He is a guy that it just dumps money into the market, and he makes no bones about it. He's not concerned about inflation. He is just going to pump the money supply. And last year, we saw this happen at a pace that has never happened in history. And depending on who you're listening to and who's telling you, you'll hear that about 30%, give or take, of all the dollars, all the US dollars ever created in history were created last year. Just last year, in 1 year. That is absolutely unbelievable. Now, the fear out of this that we all should be concerned about is, will this cause inflation? Because when you create a lot of dollars and they become less scarce, okay, then those dollars go out and chase goods and services in the marketplace. They chase properties and they bid up the prices of those properties. They chase haircuts and cars and everything else under the sun, and those prices go up, right? As more dollars are chasing a limited supply of goods and services. So there's a fear of inflation. And I think that fear is pretty well founded. So Jerome Powell, our rich uncle, has changed the game for us. Some people will get massively hurt by it, and others who understand it will benefit from it and create a lot of wealth. So let's hope that all of us benefit from this rather than being hurt by it like other people are. So let's use gold as a measuring stick. Okay, gold is the most common one. For 5,000 years, pretty much, everybody's considered gold to be real money versus currency like the dollar, the US dollar, or the Zimbabwe dollar is paper. It's just fiat. It's not real money. And fiat, by the way, you hear this fiat money, it just means by authority or by decree, just because, this has value because the government said it has value, right? That's it. Okay.
The Connected Investors app connects you with investors, notifies you of available properties, helps locate cash buyers, and secure private funding to close deals. Set up in seconds to become a member of the Connected Investors social network. Now you can scroll through your main feed to find cash buyers, see investment properties not available to the general public, and network with investors by adding your own comments to a thread to keep the conversation going. The Control Center is your connection to add properties to sell, start new discussions, connect with local investors, and even find private funding. The Notifications tab will keep you alerted to new investment properties and offers. You'll also find new friend requests to connect directly with the community to build your network. From the property marketplace, you'll be able to find, favorite, and make offers on investment properties. Download Connected Investors today to find, figure, fund, and flip investment properties on the go.
Okay, there's nothing really backing it. But gold is like a real money. Most people think this, and there's a lot of gold bugs in the world who believe gold is the ultimate version of money, right? I don't agree with this, by the way. I'm not a gold bug because I think gold is very flawed in many ways, but whatever. So in 2010, the median home price was right about here. This was the gold price, and it would take you 163 ounces of gold to buy a house. And in 2015, the median price was here, the gold price was here, and it would take you 285 rounding ounces of gold to buy a house. Okay. 2020, only 188 ounces of gold to buy a house. But 2021, as of January, and now it's even higher. Okay, these are January numbers when it's 2001. They're year-end numbers for the other. Is someone got a question? Or needs to mute, one or the other. 215 ounces to buy a house. Okay, so you can see that when you price a house in gold, it looks very different than when you price it in dollars. Okay. Now, what about Bitcoin? Well, this one is crazy because how many of you own Bitcoin or are intrigued by it at least? Okay. So I dabble in it. I own some. I'm not a huge believer because I think that they can just shut it down at any time. But I would love nothing more than to be wrong about that, by the way, because I would love to see a decentralized currency or money that isn't controlled by the government or a central bank. I think that'd be awesome. But that's the libertarian in me talking. But the practical person in me says that the governments and central banks around the world do not like Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency because it represents competition for their currency, the dollar or the euro or the yen or the Brazilian real or the Mexican peso, right? But, and they have standing armies. They have police thugs that will shut things down, right? And Bitcoin doesn't have that. Okay, so that there are some concerns about Bitcoin. But nonetheless, Bitcoin has had an incredible run, and we'll see if it keeps going. And as of January, it was about $49,000. About $49,000. So in 2010, when Bitcoin was worth nothing, pretty much, it would take you 773,000 Bitcoin to buy a house, and the house price was lower then. But today, it would only take you 7.5 Bitcoin to buy a house. Pretty shocking and amazing, isn't it? Okay. So if you use Bitcoin as a measuring stick, housing is really, really cheap, incredibly cheap. What about oil? Oil's a very common commodity. The whole world runs on it. Okay. In 2010, it would take you 2,500 barrels of oil to buy a house. Okay. In 2015, it'd take you 8,080. I'm rounding off, obviously. You can see the exact number on the chart. Take you about 8,100 barrels. Right now, it takes you about 5,600 barrels of oil to buy a house. So if you measure in oil, have houses become cheaper or more expensive, right? And look, you might be thinking, by the way, that this is kind of like, Jason, so what? I'm not measuring it in oil or Bitcoin or anything else. I measure it in dollars. But look, you could have easily taken your savings account in 2010 and simply converted it to oil shares. And by 2020, or 21, the house would have been a different price in oil than it would have been in 2010. You didn't need to keep your money in a savings account denominated in dollars, right? You chose to do that. So you can convert your dollars to anything else and then wait 10 years and the price is going to be different than everybody else thinks it is, right? Okay, what about orange juice? How many of you drink orange juice, right? I don't know. If I'm going to drink orange juice, I want to mix it with vodka, okay? But anyway, in 2010, it would take you 1,300 pounds of orange juice to buy a house. In 2021, it would take you 3,400 pounds of orange juice to buy a house. So you see, if you measured in orange juice, housing is pretty expensive, right? Okay. So what about if we don't measure it in anything else? We just use dollars. And let's just stick with dollars. But let's compare those dollars over time, the time value of money, right? Because to gain perspective on anything, we need to have a time comparison, don't we? You know how when you talk to an older person, they'll say something like, Sonny, when I was your age, you could send a postcard for 5 cents or a penny maybe or whatever. And nowadays it costs, 30 cents or something maybe, right? Or that candy bar was a nickel and now it's $1, right? You hear these type of things, right? And they're right? But they're not adjusting for inflation, right? It might be actually less expensive today, even though they think it's more expensive. And that's the deceiving part. How many of you were investing in real estate, or if you weren't, you were at least paying attention to the economy and the real estate market back in 2006, 15 years ago? How many? Anybody? Nobody? Well, some of you have your video off, so I can't tell. But anyway, if you bought the median price house in 2006 and you measured it on a monthly payment basis, that monthly payment would have been about $1,533 a month. Okay, well, what if you bought that house today, okay, in 2020, that payment is $1,319 a month, rounding off. So $1,319 per month versus $1,533 per month. So the monthly payment, and by the way, this is as of 2020. Okay, my stats, I haven't updated them yet. So I probably need to update them, but they're close. They're still close. Okay, close enough for government work, as the saying goes. Okay. But the house monthly payment is actually cheaper today than it was then, without even adjusting for inflation. That's simply an adjustment for the current price and the current interest rate, because our rich uncle, Jerome Powell, made the interest rates so much lower. So the house is cheaper, not more expensive. Even though anybody you listen to on the news, you read in the media, they're all going to say something like, well, house prices are higher now than they were in 2006. And look what happened right after 2006 We had a financial collapse. We had the worst economy in over 7 decades. We had the Great Recession or the global financial crisis, right? But are they right? Are houses really more expensive now than they were then? They are if you're paying cash, but if you're measuring it on a mortgage payment basis per month, they're actually cheaper. Any thoughts or questions about that one? Let's do one more thing. Let's also adjust for inflation. So instead of talking, right, since I've been talking about these numbers, I've been talking about what's called nominal dollars. Nominal dollars just means the name of the dollars, okay? Look, in nominal Zimbabwe dollars, this is 100 trillion nominal dollars. That's the name of it, right? Nominal means in name only. It's just the name of something. It doesn't mean the value of anything. It just means the name of it. But what's the value of these mortgage payments after we adjust for inflation? So here's what it looked like in 2006, right? And then let's take a look at the charts here. So in 2020, home price is, in the middle of last year, $313,000, right? It's a lot higher than it was in 2006, right? A lot higher, no question about it. But the interest rate got a lot lower. So here, if we look at the interest rate, and this is back last year, of course, very low. It's a little higher now, but it's still very, very low, okay? And so we get that payment adjustment. But if you adjust for inflation based on the government's official inflation adjustment number, the consumer price index, which is understating inflation dramatically, in my opinion. And the motivation for this on the government's part, you might be thinking, well, why would the government understate inflation? Well, the government has 2 big motivations to do this. Number one, the government entitlements and government salaries, the cost of living increases that they pay to government employees, is indexed to inflation. Social Security payments are indexed to inflation. Government salaries, and now the government employs more than 20% of the economy. It's ridiculous how big they are. All indexed to inflation. So if the government tells us inflation is, what it really is, they're going to have to increase those payments much more dramatically. And also, it's simply for optics, right? They want us to think inflation is lower than it really is, so we're not so upset when we go to the voting booth, right? Well, maybe the voting booth doesn't even matter anymore after the last election, but I digress, okay? That's a whole nother subject. I might get censored if I talk about that. So, they have a motivation for understating inflation. How do they do this? There's 3 major ways they understate and manipulate the inflation numbers: weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. Okay, so weighting just means that the consumer price index is this basket of goods. It's this basket that says, this is what all the things are that people commonly spend money on. And as they spend money on this stuff, the value will fluctuate all the time. And then they'll come out with a new report and tell us what the CPI is doing, right? Based on this basket of goods. But the problem is they get to weight the value of things in the basket. So if one item in the basket goes up in price a lot, but another item goes down, they can weight them differently. And by assigning a different weighting to them, they can manipulate and make the numbers look artificially lower than they are. The other thing they do is they substitute. So if the price of beef goes up and you really like steak, they'll just assume that everybody will convert to chicken. And maybe you don't like chicken. Maybe you think chicken's a dirty bird and you'd rather have beef, right? And so they just assume that the substitution will occur even when people may not want to do the substitution, okay? Then the other thing they do that's probably the most tricky and murky of them all is called hedonic indexing. So think of the word hedonism, right? It means pleasure seeking, right? If I'm a hedonist, I'm seeking pleasure. Okay, well, hedonic indexing says that if something gets better and you derive more pleasure from it as a consumer, they can artificially adjusts the price lower than it really is. So here's a great example. How about a cell phone, a smartphone? These phones are incredible, right? They're incredibly smart. They do amazing things. Well, my first phone cost $3,200 and it weighed 14 pounds. And it was like a lunchbox with a receiver that you could pull off of it. And all you could do was call people and have them call you. So if you hedonically index today's iPhone or today's Android phone, it's going to look incredibly cheap versus the other one. Now, this one costs $1,500 and everybody was complaining, I don't know if Apple can sell $1,500 phones. And I was one of the few people that actually thought it was cheap. I think this phone's amazing for $1,500 compared to my first one. Okay. It's pretty incredible. But the problem is that when the consumer price index, when the government hedonically indexes stuff, they're basically saying that we as people are not entitled to progress. Think about that for a moment. Can you imagine if they hedonically indexed every electronic product or, electric product, I should say, to the invention of a light bulb? It would be like everything is free, right? But the reality is it's not free. I still paid $1,500 for this phone. Okay. Either way, it basically says we don't get the entitlement to the progress. The consumer price index gets it to make inflation look lower than it really is. So, there's logic behind hedonic indexing, but it's also unfair at the same time because it says we don't get the progress. They do. Okay. Well, what if we index this payment not only for the price of the house and for the lower interest rate, but also for inflation, just based on the official numbers, not based on the real numbers, which I believe are at least double the official numbers, if not more. That means the house in 2020, 14 years later, was $657 per month cheaper than it was 14 years earlier. Yet everybody is saying it's more expensive. When you sell one of your properties, people are buying it not on the price, but on the payment. And this benefits real estate investors dramatically because when rates are low and inflation adjustments are in, people look at real estate and think it's cheap. And this is why people keep wondering why the price of real estate keeps skyrocketing decade after decade after decade. It's because when you adjust for the real value of it, at least now, it's still cheap. A lot of people will take issue with that, but they are wrong. It is not expensive unless you're paying cash. But guess what? Here's the beauty for real estate investors. You can buy on a payment, and when you sell, you can get cash. And this is why the rich keep getting richer and the wealth cap keeps getting bigger. Okay? So look, my mom grew up poor on a farm in upstate New York, and I grew up not quite as poor as her, but poor still. And she used to say to me when I was a kid, the best way to help the poor is don't be one of them. Okay. So hopefully today I have helped you not be one of them. Okay. Because that really is the best way to help the poor, right? By creating success for yourself. And along the way, you're just naturally, even without thinking about it, you're going to employ people, you're going to improve properties, you're going to provide jobs, you're going to, consume commodities, provide housing. This is the way capitalism works. And it's not perfect by any means. It's just better than everything else, as Winston Churchill said. Okay. So there's a lot more about all this stuff on my YouTube channel. In fact, I had one video recently where I talked about inflation in a different way than we've talked about it today. And that video it only was released like 2 weeks ago. It's got over 300,000 views now. So check that out. Also, I teach a whole bunch of other strategies that I don't have time to talk about today. One is called Refi Till You Die, which is basically this perpetual wealth machine with real estate, with income property. And my contact information, my website is jasonhartman.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions.